would be one of the, or the other Brookses would be also what they call the Cheshire Brookses. There were 14 or 16 immigrant Brookses who came before 1700, and 2 of them were brothers, and they were the progenitors for this line. Anyway, so about a year and a half ago, we got a query from Gail Lewis at Historic Jacksonville, and they were restoring and reopening a bank that was started in the 1860s by a fellow named Cornelius Beekman. That is the building there in the center, and he built it in the 1860s. In the 1850s, he had an express office which he shared with a guy named Charles B. Brooks. So this is the query. I'm a volunteer in Jacksonville, Oregon with the Southern Oregon Historical Society. We're researching a collection of medical books that belong to, he signed his name, Chaz B. Brooks, who lived in Jacksonville in 1850 and likely served at Fort Lane Hill in the Indian Wars. Many of the books previously belonged to 13th U.S. Surgeon General Crane. We are really interested in anything you may have heard, any photos, any information to fill out the story. It seems he had no issue. I'm wondering why he went to the Dalles and left his books behind. Well, we're going to go through, this is more than just a story. This is a linking together of a whole bunch of rabbit trails. And if you do research at all, or enjoy detective stories, you will know that of what I speak. Okay, in Jacksonville, they were really impressed with this General Crane being the U.S. Surgeon, with Crane being the U.S. Surgeon General. Well, he was in the 1880s, but at this point in time, he was a medical officer in the southwestern Oregon, what they call Rogue River Indian Wars. So, before I go any further, this program was a research tool for the Genealogy Society, dealing with some advanced research skills. And on the left are organizations that helped out, and on the right are people who helped us out. And the late Anita Drake is on there, and those of you who knew her know that it's been a long time since she passed on. But at the Discovery Center Library, we have a lot of her materials. So this query came through the internet to the Hood River Historical Society, ended up at the Discovery Center, and finally it was the Columbia Gorge Genealogical Society that took it and ran. So, rather than go through all of the research processes, we're just going to go through this in a more linear way. Henry Brooks was one of the immigrant ancestors. He had a brother named John, and they are the Cheshire Brookses. So anyway, Henry had Thomas, who had Stephen, who had Thomas, who had Chauncey, who had Frederick Brooks, who is our Charles Brooks's father. And all of this information came from a really high-end website on the computer that traces all of the different Brooks groups. So we did not double-check all of this information back that we did enough researching to know that this is the line of people that our Charles Brooks came from. So Connecticut is where this family came when they first came to the United States. So Frederick Brooks, Charles's father, decided that he would walk to Tennessee because he had a relative there who owed him money. And I can't tell you how many times in genealogy research we hear people went somewhere because somebody owed them money. Mostly young single guys. Anyway, so he ended up in Manassas Junction, Virginia, which is in, I believe, in Loudoun County. And so he fell in love with the local girl. And her dad was a large plantation owner, had a huge number of slaves. And so when Frederick Brooks married this man's daughter and went to the western part of Virginia, he was given slaves to take with him. So where they ended up was a place in what is now West Virginia called the Kanawha River Valley. And that is where our Charles Brooks was born. And the reason that the whole family went to West Virginia in this particular place was because it was in about the 1790s, some trappers discovered what the Indians had, of course, known for many, many years, was that there was salt under the ground. And so it was a salt lick to the west of them, and then along the river, they devised a method of bringing the brine up. They hollowed out trees, pushed them down into the ground, and the brine raised up without a lot of pollution. And then they boiled it and dried it. And so Brookses were not the biggest salt makers, but they were part of that group, and until about 1860, they were very, very active in. And this was a totally slave-driven business. And also, they started out in the early years with using wood as a source to boil their water, and then coal was discovered, which is what we think of with West Virginia. And so some of those salt makers owned coal facilities as well as the salt making facilities. And I will get back to some of this in a little bit, but this area was a very difficult area in the Civil War, because brothers fought brothers and neighbors fought neighbors, and the reason that this whole valley had a lot of fighting was because of the salt. The Confederacy needed the salt. So anyway, our Mr. Brooks went from West Virginia to Kentucky, where he went to school, and then he went to, okay, I'm sorry, I just totally lost my train of thought. Anyway, he went to Kentucky, to a place called Danville, where he lived with a lawyer and his family so that he could go to school. And where he lived in West Virginia was very, very primitive. There were schools, but not higher education. So then from there, he went on to Louisville, Kentucky, and went to medical school. And from there, during and after the Civil War, he had a brother who was a Confederate soldier, or actually cavalry in Texas. He had a brother who went to Leadville, Colorado. They kind of scattered all over, and where they ended up after the father went back to his plantation in Chesapeake County, Kentucky, they just kind of scattered. So now we're going to back up just a little bit, and so yes, I told you all that Frederick went from Connecticut, headed for Tennessee, married Frances Fanny Skinner Odom, relocated to Kennewaw, purchased the salt works, and if you have any knowledge of this salt industry, most of the slaves were not owned by these people. They actually leased them from people in the eastern part of Virginia for calendar years. I have a lot of information back here that is, I find quite interesting. Anyway, 1832, Charles was born. 1840, the family owned 27 slaves. 1850, they owned fewer. 1860, Dad, Frederick, relocated to Kentucky, where he evidently had already had a plantation. And the term plantation is not always what you think of as, Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara. Any farm that was farmed by slave labor was considered a plantation rather than a farm in that particular area and that particular time. So Charles's father died in 1869. Charles had come out here. Never found anything that indicated he went back to see his parents. So anyway, when they moved to Kanawha County, they moved into an old building at what had been officially called Fort Lee, but it was called Clenden's Fort. And when we look at friends and relatives who came out here, that name will show up again. By the way, I have a print copy of all of these slides, so if there's something you want to ask about or look at later, just it's over here. Okay, so we found the documentation for Charles Brooks' birth in the Presbyterian Church records here. So and those of us who do this kind of research, we're pretty much sticklers for being able to document everything that we find. So with this one, it was a little hard because sometimes we say, well, he possibly went on the river when he went to St. Louis. He possibly, or he might have, or chances are, or there are a lot of words that genealogists use. One of them we don't use is the word assume, because you can't assume anything. So these are some pictures, and if this is something that is of interest to you, there's a lot on the internet about the salt factories, and they advertise the salt as the strong red salt from Kanawha Licks. It was preferred for meat curing and butter making. Made first prize in the 1851 World's Fair in London. And in spite of all of those wonderful advertising things, it was strictly a slave-driven industry. It was not an agricultural industry. It was strictly business, which is far different from most of the Deep South plantations. Salt was their business. Salt and, in the later years, coal. So now we have a salt maker named Dickinson, who I think that she told me that they are 7th generation. They've reopened the salt works in Malton, West Virginia. They use a different technique. They air dry their salt. This is how it comes out of the ground. This is the same as that strong red salt. So they purify it, and then this is just for kicks. This is pink salt from the Himalayas or the Himalayas, and I just wanted to show you that salt takes all sorts of forms. So let us let you guys look at these. And what? Yes, up in the corner. Yes. We have that picture. Is that right?
That's my grandmother. But we didn't know her information. But I did that picture.
Oh, is that right? The Discovery Center has that picture and the picture of his wife. And he has no dairy. And so anybody who wants to taste different salts, we'll take them downstairs after the program, and I've got some little containers, but just don't look at your finger and stick it in it, please. What? Okay. And the Dickinson Salt Works I have a few brochures. They're online, and they sell all sorts of salt. They sell bath salts, and they do all sorts of and that's one of the reasons why I picked up the pink salt, because these people also sell the kind of salt that supposedly helps with your moods and all this stuff. Anyway, so that's so if you look at this, you know that Charles Brooks, as a child and as a young man, was right in the middle of all of this. So this was his background. So we had, like I say, we're not going through the manner in which we found all this stuff, but I contacted the Central College in Danville, Kentucky, and I think Georgia, was it you, maybe, that found it on the internet, the same thing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. Anyway,
that college is still going.
What?
That college is still going.
Yes,
It's
it
still
is. This is the building that Charles Brooks went to school in. It was, during the Civil War, it was used to house troops of both sides, not at the same time. I think in 1863, it burned. So I went back to the college library there and found a picture of the first one. He could be in that picture, who knows? Anyway, so the important part of trying to put all this stuff together was in one of their yearbooks in a section called necrology, which is just a listing of all of their graduates who were no longer living. So it says that Charles Bradford Brooks, which we've been told before, son of Frederick Brooks, a native of Bristol, Connecticut, and Fanny Odom Brooks of Loudoun County, Virginia, born October 3, 1832 in Charleston, West Virginia, where he pursued his preparatory studies. On leaving college, Mr. Brooks pursued the study of medicine in Louisville. It doesn't mention Danville, but it's moved to Oregon in 1853. So we pursued that date rather than the 1850s that we got from Southern Oregon. Practiced his profession successfully at the Dalles of the Columbia River. Died November 5, 1875 of pneumonia. He married Mrs. Nellie Cotton, named Chandler. He left no children. Ellie, his name was Ellen. Cotton is either Cotton, Captain, Carlton. It's spelled all different ways. And but she was a widow, and her husband allegedly was killed in 1863 in the Civil War. She had a brother who had come out west to Walla Walla, and have not done a lot of research on that, but cannot find her first husband under any of those spellings. So, you know, and those of us who do this, we never quit. So, you know, 6 months from now or 2 years, Georgia will email me and she'll say, guess what I found when I was looking for something else. Oh, so anyway, that's where he went to preparatory school in Danville. And what was interesting is that his family didn't live in Danville. He lived with an attorney and his wife who had a son the same age. And so I got to thinking, why would he be in this strange town with this family that seemingly was not related to him? And I've seen census records before where people would stay with other people so they could go to school. So then I just did a search on Boyle County, Kentucky. And Boyle County, specifically Danville, was touted as the education capital of Kentucky. So that kind of led us into that. So he lived with other people and went to school there. So
did he have his medical degree when he was 21?
And I've read a lot of the written materials from the Louisville Medical College, which is still in operation. And it was kind of the mid-1800s version of sitting around the scholar who has all the information. So it was lectures. It was lectures in various things. So what we also found out from doing research in West Virginia was that one of his brothers and a man named Ruffner, which you will hear again also, had a wholesale salt selling facility in Louisville. And just the Kanawha River runs into the Ohio River, which runs into the Mississippi. But if you go back upstream on the Mississippi a little bit, you end up where the Missouri River flows into. So this whole system of water and riverboats and very conducive to traveling long distances. Also, very conducive to slaves saying, I'm out of here. And that was one of the problems, that there were lawsuits in the salt works where someone leased slaves and then the slaves disappeared and then the actual owner sued the lessor, whatever. Anyway, so this is where he went to school. He was there from 1850 to 1853. So that tells you what, he wasn't in Jacksonville in 1850. So that, every piece that we put together in this puzzle helps us with some other pieces. There is a library at the Louisville Medical College called the Kornhausen with a K library, which has all of the records going way back from the medical college. So that was another resource for us. So anyway, in the 1850s, 1860s, there was a recession. Salt wasn't valued at what it used to be. Charles Brooks' father was getting older. He put his salt works up for sale, and then eventually he lost it. And that was when he went back to Kentucky, or to Kentucky. Yeah. And so within a few months, he and his wife celebrated their golden wedding anniversary, and he passed away. He had 6 of their 8 children were present. 7 of those were boys. The 2 who weren't present were the son who went to Leadville, Colorado, and the son who went to Oregon. So, and like I say, a lot of this stuff is really difficult to read there, but I have it in the book here. So anyway, so our Dr. Brooks immigrated to Oregon in 1853. And somewhere in this area, where in earlier years there had been what they call the Lost Wagon Train, they turned off the Oregon Trail, went down through the desert area, and ended up where Bend is now. Bend didn't exist. Bend, a lot of people don't realize that Bend is a fairly new town, and Deschutes County is the newest county in Eastern Oregon. Anyway, so in this area, they were given information about this new road that went to Willamette Valley. It was called the Elliott Cutoff because the first wagon train that went through was led by Mr. Elliott. And any of you who have done wagon train research know that you have a group of 500 wagons. They split because somebody's mad at somebody. Then some of them go with somebody else. And so in terms of just having a cohesive wagon train that went from Missouri to the Willamette Valley all in one piece with the same people, didn't happen very often. It didn't happen here either. And that he was a young single man, and but his name crops up several places in trail journals. Once he and another young man got chased back to camp by Indians, and then later up in the Oak Ridge area, this trail was hardly a trail, and the people were running out of food, and so a group of the young men went on down toward Eugene and found a rescue train, wagon train coming toward them, and also people who lived out in the middle of what would have been nowhere. And so those are the only mentions of him. So there is a lady named Stephanie Flora who has a lot of wagon train research on the internet. And there's no documentation for this, but allegedly, when young Mr. Brooks came across on the Elliott Cutoff, he had several slaves with him. There is no documentation anywhere that we have found. One of them, according to the people in Jacksonville, was a man named Samuel Bowes, who ended up being a barber in Jacksonville. And funny thing, found this document. It's a document allowing him to enter the United States from what was the Sandwich Islands. And based on this, he was born in Pennsylvania. He went around the Horn, went to Hawaii, came to the Northwest Coast, and as a free black settled in Jacksonville in 1849. So wherever this story came from about Brooks and his slaves, I found nothing that corroborate that. Right now, Oregon Village Podcast is working with a group in terms of finding blacks who came as slaves to Oregon, and we're going to connect with that later this week to find out about this center. He's listed on the wagon train, but with no documentation. So it's one of those assumed situations. So if you look at this map, there's the Barlow Road, and then that green is that meat cutoff, and that's where they went Parkway. And so the Oregon Trail just wasn't one trail. I think you probably all know that. Anyway, so this is what Jacksonville looked like in 1854 and 1855, about the time that Brooks showed up there. And in 1853, it's in what's now called Dallas in Benton County. The people that he came across the plains with had some ties to the area in West Virginia that were running quite for the and he ventured in the Upper Valley and then in 1840 to Jacksonville. So can you read the story about Jacksonville? There are 230 families in the valley, and among that number, about 60 marriageable ladies. So that advertisement came through one of the Oregon Territory papers. I saw. Anyway, so he was all over the place. This is Beekman's first building that he shared with Dr. Brooks. Dr. Brooks was not only in Jacksonville, at one time he had what was called a surgical hospital. Sometimes he was working with another doctor, Drs. Brooks and Thompson. And in 1859, he went to a place called Williamsburg in Josephine County, met the Applegate brothers, and had a surgery there. So he was just kind of all over the place. So let's look at dates. You've got 1856, 58, 59, 61. About that time he left. So where was he between 1853 and 1856? We figured that out. These you're not going to be able to read up here, but basically it talks every newspaper, if there was an illness or an energy or an injury that was severe enough, it made the paper. So says, we learned from Dr. Brooks that a few days ago he was called to visit a miner at Sterling who was severely bruised by the falling of a drift. He had one leg broken and the other severely injured, also his face and arm badly bruised. The doctor thinks he will recover. He was unable to leave the name of the unfortunate man. So most of what these doctors did was go out where the mines were, out where the placers were, and I can't help but, couldn't have been a very fun kind of doctor. It was a lot of people died. Anita Drake, who was a local researcher, left a whole series of file cards. She said that he was mentioned in 1856 as a physician with the U.S. Army. Did not corroborate that. The Bancroft History of Oregon, which was a really early one, mentioned him as involved with the military down there. People in Jacksonville thought that he was probably at Camp Lane, which was north of Jacksonville. If you look at the locations, plural, of the Rogue Indian Wars, they were down into California, they were to the ocean, they were up to the Roseburg area and on into what became Modoc country. So, I just put these in here just to show that he was mentioned. Okay, a Dr. Larsel, who was with OHSU in 1940, he was a teaching physician, and one of the assignments that he had his students do was do research and trace frontier doctors. So Dr. Brooks is in the book. The book is still pretty much thought of as definitive and accurate for the early eras. But what Dr. Brooks was in the book for was something entirely different. He was a physician in Jacksonville
the Indian Scare came, almost every able-bodied man in Jacksonville mounted his horse and went off to unofficially fight the Indians. And Brooks didn't go. I don't know anything more about that. But the women were just disgusted that their men had gone off and left them helpless and left them unprotected. And so somebody in Jacksonville thought that was really funny and ran a pair of pantaloons up to the flagpole in front of the post office at half-mast. And the story was that the ladies couldn't get them down, and so Dr. Brooks got them down. So in Marshall's book, that's his claim to fame. So I told you that you just never stop looking. So yesterday, I got back into a very long series of abstracts of Oregon military information from that era and from that place. So, here we go. These are all doctors. We, the undersigned surgeons and assistant surgeons of the 2nd Regiment Oregon Mounted Volunteers, they are proposing that the Surgeon General be replaced. There was a lot about that issue and a lot about politics in general and what I was seeing. But not only does it tell me that Brooks was a doctor in the Oregon Mounted Volunteers, but the Oregon State Archives Military Department should have more information. So anyway, that was last night. Okay, so now we look at what happened in Jacksonville. There are this whole cache of books. When Beacon died in 1915, in his will it said that his bank should become a museum. Well, off and on over the years it sort of was, but it was never really reopened. And so this last couple of years when the Historical Society has taken the building over, they found these 45 medical books that carried the signature of Charles V. Brooks, and in some instances, Charles Crane. Some of them have both names. Some of them say Charles V. Brooks bought this book from Charles Crane. So they are still in Jacksonville. I don't know what 41 books that are about this size would weigh. But I do know that until the 1880s, the only way to get out of Jacksonville and head north was by stagecoach or horseback or riding a mule. And so we can surmise that he probably left them there because it wasn't convenient to bring them to Dallas, or that it was too difficult. And then he wasn't very old when he died, so he went back and got his books. So we weren't able to answer the question from Jacksonville, but we certainly are learning an awful lot about Charles Brooks. And Charles Crane, who did become the 13th Surgeon General for the United States, was present with Lincoln the night that he died. But when he was in Jacksonville, he wasn't terribly old. So you know, whether they became buddies. I do know from everything that I've read that there was and always is, when you have professional soldiers and a contingent of volunteers, that there is some sort of strife. And that was true. That was true then. So, we know that he left Jacksonville. We know he came to the Dalles. We don't know if he went anywhere in between. But we know that in that by 1866, he ran for the county coroner and was elected. He was also appointed as the county physician out on 10th Street, where the nursing home is now. It used to be the county hospital. And then at different times over those years, he was the county hospital administrator. Keep in mind that as a hospital administrator, he made so many dollars a month. As a coroner, he was only paid if there was a body. So he did his 2 years as a coroner. He was also a Democrat. And in the next election cycle, the Democrats lost. And that was an era when people mostly voted straight party. So we only find him as the county coroner. But we have a lot of entries for him in terms of being political, not a political doctor, but being appointed for the county hospital and what have you. So when he first came to the Dalles, he had a place in Columnus Craig's drugstore, which Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, was just west of the Waldron building.
Yeah, I don't know.
And that's what I had. And then eventually he removed to an office on Federal Street. And but the Dallas Mountaineers are full of his advertisements. Every right here is probably where where he was and where the Waldron building is. We don't have very many pictures of early First Street. There's the Waldron building down there. This was in the aftermath of one of the infamous spring floods. So these are more stories about accidents that he went to. One, he had a friend who was the physician at Warm Springs, and the fellow had an accident with his horse and wagon, and they sent a rider to the Dalles to get Dr. Brooks, and by the time he got back, the other doctor had passed away. So Mr. Wheeler, this stagecoach robbery got a lot of press, and Wheeler was shot through the mouth. And so it says, it gives his opinion that Mr. Wheeler will lose the front and left side of his upper jaw, crippling him for life and fearfully disfiguring him. There's another incident where we went to Willow Springs, which is so we have a lot of advertisements, and we have a few newspaper articles, and telling what he did. Then here comes Lulu Crandall. Many of you who have been here for a long time probably know who Lulu Crandall is. She was the local historical expert on just about everything. So she wrote the story for the Oregonian in 1925. And you know what trepanation is? You ready? Well, that's the process by which, if you have a brain swelling, they drill a hole in your skull to release the pressure. So here's another one of those things that we can't prove. These are the Indian bones on Grave Island or on Lower Meadows, I'm not sure. So there was allegedly a soldier at the fort who had fallen off his horse, hit his head, and was not expected, the surgeon at the fort did not expect him to live his severe brain swelling. So Brooks told this other surgeon about this process, allegedly. And the surgeon just thought he was crazy. So Brooks knew somebody who had a small riverboat, and the guy took him to the Indian burial island. And according to Lulu's Randall's story, Brooks really wanted a whole skeleton once he saw what was out there, but the other guy said, no, you take your skull so you can show the guy. And so I have the article, and it ends by saying that they did the procedure and the guy lived. So I have been through military records, I have been through military medical records, I have been all over the place and have never found any documentation on this incident, the name of the surgeon at Fort Wells, the name of the soldier, and the name of the soldier, and it's not off the top of my head, but it's almost identical to the name of a doctor in Jacksonville. So either the story got all tangled up, or it was just a figment of someone's imagination. So you will, if you poke around in local medical history, you're probably going to run into that. And but no evidence that there was any truth to it. So, Brooks had never been married. And so in 1868, as I told you earlier, he was married to this widow lady named Nellie, who had been married before and had a daughter. And we had a researcher who has Chandler roots in New England. And she tried to, this is out of one of those turn of the 20th century genealogy books that is usually have more mistakes than it has other things. So this is just a copy of what I found in that book, and it doesn't seem to jive with her. So we still don't really know an awful lot about who she was. But Dr. Brooks died, I think, 47. There were no newspapers that are still in existence from that year. They're from here. We found a very brief obituary in the Oregon Farmer, and other than that, And this necrology that we found in Kentucky, we don't know. So, Nellie's daughter married one of the younger Cole brothers. She married Henry Cole. And this is part of their property just west of 12th on Oak Street in Hood River. In about 1925, they were doing some excavating and they found bodies. And the Coles had their own private cemetery at one time. One of the elderly neighbor ladies said, "Oh yes, I know who those are." So that may or may not be true. But when Charles Brooks' wife's daughter married Henry Cole, they had a boy named Charles Brooks Cole, and he died when he was 2. And so the daughter and her 2 daughters are buried in a mausoleum in Portland. And her husband, it's kind of interesting because we're not real sure how this all played out, but he went to California. And so I found no indication that they ever divorced, but they didn't live together. And so her mom would visit her in the river. So our next question, after not being able to find where Dr. Brooks was buried, we couldn't find where his wife died or where she was buried. And so this is one of those research projects that has more questions than answers. So anyway, just on a hunch, we started researching her name in other places. And I don't know how P-R-E-Y-N is pronounced. Probably not true. Anyway, so we found her in Ellensburg, Washington. She had gone to Yakima and married this attorney, and very well-known attorney. And they eventually moved to Ellensburg. They're both buried in Ellensburg, but we would never in this lifetime have looked for Nellie Prim or Nellie Prim. And but by looking at the old Hood River newspapers, we found articles that said that the Brooks's daughter Nellie Brooks's daughter in Hood River was visited by her father, Edward, and his wife, Nellie. So, stepfather, but we found them. And so, anyway, so we never did find Edward Brooks' grave, but we found his wife's grave, and we found his stepdaughter's grave. Maybe that isn't important, but what we now know is how all these pieces fit together. So, it says, Mrs. Prim's mother was Elizabeth White Chandler, also a native of Auburn, New York. Mrs. Chandler's grandfather, White, built the Auburn Penitentiary and other state buildings, and later a female seminary at Auburn, in which his daughters became instructors. Mr. Prim's mother was one of them. So these 2 people grew up together in central New York and married all those years later. We have a kind of a genealogy genealogy gimmick where you can't find what you're looking for, you look for the family, look for the friends, look for the neighbors, look for the people who migrated with you. And so often things like this happen. So this has absolutely nothing to do with books. I just thought it was interesting. Charles Babbage was a scientist in England in the 1800s, and he built what was the first adding machine. And as he says, on 2 occasions I've been asked, "Pray, Mr. Babbage, if you put into the machine wrong figures, will the right answers come out?" And he says, "I'm not able to rightly apprehend the kind of confusion of ideas that could provoke such a question." I thought that was cool. And this is machine. Now, the machine that we're working on today and had so much trouble with is one of the forerunners. Anyway, so that's basically what we know about Dr. Brooks. But what I find kind of mind-boggling is that when we got the query from Jacksonville, none of us had ever heard of him. And so he didn't belong to a Masonic organization. He was not an oddfellow. I was allowed to look, and he was not members of any of these, and nor was he blackballed by them. Sometimes we're not allowed to be in these organizations. I could find no church references. Usually, if someone is a professional, you find bits and pieces about not just where they worked, but what they belonged to and who their friends were, and whether his wife was ill during the years they were married. When she was married to a gentleman from Yakima and Elusive, in her obituary it says that she had been in ill health for years, and that was why her last husband didn't do a lot of things in a lot of places and join things. So I don't know. So there's Dr.